I was really worried that we would do Jude 11 part 1 or Jude 11 part 2, and then the rapture would happen, and I would have never got to do this lesson today. I was really worried about that. But we're here. I probably better talk fast just in case. I just want to get this out. But I tell you what, this Jude study is just flying by, right?
Right.
Woo!
Woo.
Jude 11 part 3. Here we go. Okay, we'll read the verse again that we've been looking at. Jude writes, "Woe to them! They have taken the way of Cain. They have rushed for profit into Balaam's error. They have been destroyed in Korah's rebellion." The lesson today, I called it Harassed from the Past. And it's a weird title. What?
I got harassed yesterday by a little kid.
Yeah. Did you know that the way to pronounce harassed is actually harassed?
Yeah.
Did you know that?
No.
It's called harassment. If you look it up in the dictionary, like if someone says sexual harassment, it's actually legally or not legally. If you look at the dictionary, the way the dictionary will tell you how to sound it out, sexual harassment. You say, I was harassed. But we all say it, harassed. There's some words like that. Did you know reptile is not actually reptile? If you look in the dictionary. Reptile, yeah.
Oh, that was close.
Yeah,
Good
you
job,
were.
honey.
Reptile for some reason. So, harassed from the past, that's what today is. And if you noticed in the Jude 11 study, part 1 was outcast from the past. That was about Cain because he was cursed. I was just looking for things that rhyme. Because you ever heard that expression, blast from the past?
No.
Or there was a movie called that I watched a lot growing up, Blast from the Past. Outcast from the past was Cain. Forecast from the past, that was Balaam because he was a prophet, so he would give a forecast. So that's where that was. This week, harassed from the past. This is about a guy named Korah. And yes, like the legend of Korah.
After a guy.
You know, if I wasn't doing this whole rhyming thing, I probably would have called the lesson today The Legend of Korah, because that would have been a great title.
Yeah, you should have called it that.
But I was already rhyming along, so I wanted to get all these different contrasts from the past in our lessons. So that's why I went through these rhymes. We could say harassed from the past, and that just ruins the whole thing. So you can call today The Legend of Korah if you want to.
The Legend of Ashley's Mom.
The Legend of Ashley's Mom. All right, so not many people have heard of Korah. Kind of like Balaam. Not many people have heard of Balaam, but like I said last week, Balaam's in the Bible mentioned more than Mary is, as in like the mother of Jesus. Balaam's mentioned more than she is. But most people haven't heard of Balaam, and Balaam has several chapters. Now, Korah just has one chapter that we're going to turn to in a minute. He also is mentioned briefly in Exodus chapter 6. There's a little genealogy in Exodus, and we don't really pay much attention. You don't have to write this down. We don't pay much attention a lot whenever we read through a genealogy because they're just like name after name after name. But Korah is mentioned there in Exodus 6, and we don't have to read it all. But if you go through Korah's genealogy, you find out that he was a prince in Israel. So he had a high position. He was an important dude. And his story is in Numbers 16. So grab one of those Bibles. Let's go to Numbers 16.
Isn't Numbers the picture book?
No, Jude's the picture book.
Then Numbers is like the...
Numbers means in the wilderness. It's about Israel in the wilderness. Yeah. Follow along with me as I read. Now Korah, the son of Izhar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, with Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab. Sorry about all these names, guys. On the son of Peleth, sons of Reuben, took men. That's the important word. Those last two words there, took men. That's the thing. They got a big group of men to follow them, okay? Korah, Dathan, and Abiram took men. And they rose up before Moses with some of the children of Israel, 250 leaders of the congregation, representatives of the congregation, men of renown. So Korah, Dathan, and Abiram are these three men. They get a rebellion going, and they get 250 followers. Now, there's thousands of Israelites, but when you get 250 people on your side, you can start building a movement. And it's kind of a power struggle here that you're going to try to take power away from Moses and Aaron being the leaders. But I want you to make a note about who Korah is. I mentioned he was a prince a few minutes ago as we looked at his genealogy. Korah got 250 people to rebel against Moses. Go ahead and make a note of that, because I think that's probably, if someone says, well, who is Korah in the Bible? That's really what you'd want to be able to tell them. And so if I said to you on a quiz, who is Korah? This would be the answer. If I say what his job is, or like what was his job, what are you going to tell me?
He is a prince.
There you go. He is a prince. You can put that down as his job title. Let's go on. Let's look at verse 3 now. So what happened? He gets 250 men to follow him. They gathered together against Moses and Aaron and said to them, "You take too much upon yourselves, for all the congregation is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord?" Okay, let's examine the complaint that Korah here is bringing against Moses and Aaron. Let's see if it really holds water. First, he says, "You take too much upon yourselves." So whenever you read that, you might think, oh, well, Moses and Aaron, maybe they're like ripping people off or trying to get rich as like politicians leading the people, something like that. Maybe they're power hungry. When you read that, you take too much upon yourselves. Well, that's not what's going on whatsoever. In fact, whenever you read, like in Exodus, whenever Moses is put in the place of power, God picks Moses. It's not like Moses set himself there. God picked Moses. And Moses tried 3 or 4 times. I mean, he argued with God and said, I don't want to do it. I shouldn't be the one to do it. It's not like Moses was power hungry. It's not what Moses was all about. Korah does not really... It's not that Korah doesn't like that Moses has so much power. It's that Korah wants Moses' power. It's not that Moses is doing anything really bad or has taken too much upon himself. Korah is just the guy who wants that kind of control. He wants to lead all the people. And so that's what his complaint, that's what it really boils down to. Korah wants to say that Moses doesn't have a right to set himself up above all the people. That's kind of what it's all coming down to. But really, God had picked Moses. And this is what Korah said. "For all the congregation is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them." That's what he said. And because Moses was like the representative of God to the people, he had this special connection with God. And so Moses was like a spiritual leader to the people too. He was like their shepherd or their pastor or something like that. So he was their leader. And what he's saying here, Korah is like, see, Moses, we don't need you to be our spiritual leader because we're all spiritual. So we don't need you anymore. That's really what he's saying right here. He's trying to say that, we're all spiritual enough that we don't need a spiritual leader. And some people can feel that way about pastors. They will think, well, I don't need a pastor. I don't need a spiritual leader. And they say they can just pray and be holy and do all that stuff on their own. And there's a lot that we are supposed to do on our own. But one of the things about being holy is God says, put yourself under a pastor. Go to a church. Have an authority over you. So you can't really be holy if you're not following that commandment of God to have a pastor. So even pastors like I'm just the youth pastor, so Pastor John is still my pastor. And even the pastors in our denomination, Assemblies of God, the way that that's set up is even the pastors have pastors. So for every area of the state, there is a pastor who's in charge of all the other pastors of the Assemblies of God. So even pastors have pastors. And they're called the presbyter is what it's called for our area. So it's kind of interesting. Pastor John was the presbyter for this area at one time. He did it for 12 years. And then he stepped down from it and said, well, I don't want to do that. I just want to be just a pastor of a church now. So Pastor John actually did that for 12 years and was the presbyter. And now someone else is the presbyter. But he was really popular, Pastor John. We go to these meetings. I was at a meeting a week or two ago with him. Just in this past week, we went to a meeting where you vote in your presbyters. And there were actually still a lot of people there who wanted Pastor John to be presbyter and be our representative for the pastors in the area. So it's pretty cool. And he wasn't even running for it. He didn't even want to be voted for, and people were trying to vote for him. And he's he just stood up and he said, hey guys, I don't even want to, I did this for a long time. I don't even want to do this, but he's very popular. So he was a good presbyter apparently. Anyway, even pastors need to have authorities over them. The presbyter has a boss too. All the presbyters for the state, they have a boss called the superintendent, and he's in Springfield. So anyway, the superintendents have a boss who's called the general superintendent. And anyway, it just goes up. So everyone keeps having bosses. There's not a pope of Christianity, like Catholics have. We don't have a pope. But anyway, you always have someone who's in authority above you. So he says, Why then do you exalt yourselves? And this is a misunderstanding here about leadership. Korah is asking this to Moses. Why do you exalt yourselves? And that's not what Moses is doing. He's not like, it's not about making himself feel all powerful because he's the leader of all these people. That's not what leadership is about. And it really shouldn't. If you just want everyone to love you and you just want all the glory, I guess, that goes with being a leader, you shouldn't be a leader. I really love this poster thing that I saw on Facebook a week or two ago. And it had like a picture of like a congregation from a pulpit. And at the top of the picture, it had this picture of like from the pulpit view. And it said, this is not what leadership is all about. And then it had a picture of like someone washing someone's feet, like Jesus washed the disciples' feet. And it said at the bottom, this is what leadership is about. I wish I'd saved that because it was a really good picture. It's not about the glory of being in front of everyone. Leadership's about serving people. But it was a really good picture. But anyway, Korah has got the wrong idea. So he sees Moses as the leader and he's like, well, why do you exalt yourselves above all the people? That's what he says to Moses and Aaron. And there's actually, did you know there's churches and they'll meet every week and they don't actually have a pastor? There's a denomination, and they're good people. I'm not saying they're like not Christians, but the way that they do their churches is that just anybody who feels like God's laid something on their heart, they'll sing a song, and then anybody who wants to in the whole congregation can just get up and start talking. And then they sit down, they'll sing another song, and then if someone can get up and they can talk for 30 seconds, they can talk for 5 minutes, they can talk for 45 minutes. You just never know. And they just let anyone who wants to get up and talk. And they're good people. I'm not saying they're like not saved. I went to one of their tent revivals back in 2012 or 2013. I went to one of their meetings, and that's exactly how it was. Nice people, great Christian people, but they didn't have like a pastor leading the service. They'd sing a song, someone would get up and start talking. And I think that when I left, they weren't even done yet because they were probably going to go for a few more hours. I was there for an hour or two. They were probably going to go for 2 or 3 more hours. And some guy had been talking for like 40 minutes, and I'm like, I got to get home, and I want to go on home and see. I'm like, what? Yeah. It's back like, it was the first year we were married, I think. So I was like, they have those tent revivals can go for a long time. And these were like old-fashioned people. It was it was a good service, except I didn't like that they didn't just have someone running it, They were just letting whatever happened happen. And you do need to have a leader. You do need to have a pastor, someone who has been working on a message throughout the week. That's just a good model to have. So, for leaders of the congregation, it's not about exalting yourself. Let's go on to the next verse. You might notice that this chapter is 50 verses long. We're going to skip a lot of them. I just want to get the story out. So look at verse 4. So when Moses heard it, he fell on his face, and he spoke to Korah and all his company, saying, tomorrow morning the Lord will show who is his and who is holy, and will cause him to come near him. That one whom he chooses, he will cause to come near to him. So Moses says, we're just all going to present ourselves to God tomorrow. That's what he tells these 250 men. And we'll just let God choose, who's going to be the leader from now on. That's what Moses tells them. Let's skip down to verse 12. I want to show you what Dathan and Abiram say. In verse 12 it says, and Moses sent to call Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and they said, we will not come up. Is it a small thing that you have brought us up out of a land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness, that you should keep acting like a prince over us? Moreover, you have not brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey, nor given us inheritance of fields and vineyards. Will you put out the eyes of these men? We will not come up. Okay, so let me explain what their problem is. They've completely twisted the facts of what Israel has gone through and where they're heading. Moses basically, with God's help, of course, he saved them from being slaves in Egypt. He saved them from being slaves. And he told them, we're going to go to a land flowing with milk and honey. That's what he told them. We're going to go to a better place. It's called the land of Israel today. He said, we're all going to go there together. But Dathan and Abiram are twisting it. And they're saying, when we were in Egypt, it was a land flowing with milk and honey. They're saying Egypt was that great promised land. And Egypt was not that great. It was a desert and they were slaves. But they're twisting it because they want to make Moses look bad. So, and then they blame Moses for being wandering in the wilderness. Now, if you guys remember from an earlier story, the reason that they're wandering in the wilderness is because they were too afraid to go into Israel in the promised land. Remember, they were like, oh, but there's giant people there. And they were afraid to go in. And that's the reason God said, well, okay, fine, you guys can wander around for 40 years in the wilderness, and once you're all dead, I'll let your kids go in and fight the giants out. And that's exactly what happened. So the reason they're wandering in the wilderness, it's their own fault. Moses is the one who tried to get them to do it, but they were all too afraid. So now they're blaming Moses for it and saying it was Moses' fault when he was the only one trying to do the right thing. So if you guys are ever in a leadership position of anything, at a job or whatever, in a church even, you just got to remember, whenever you're a leader, people will say things against you that are just not even true. They'll just make up things, totally twist facts, say things that are hurtful. It'll just happen no matter what. Whenever you're in leadership, people are gonna do that. And hey, if you're ever in leadership someday and you want to come talk to me about it and be like, hey, people are making stuff up about me, I'll be like, yeah, I know. That's how it goes. I mean, I'll listen to you, because it happens whenever you're a leader. People make up things about you that are not even true. So anyway, that's what they're doing to Moses here and to Aaron. And you might say, well, why are Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, why are they challenging Moses' leadership and just saying things that are not even true? Here's a good reason for it. And you don't have to put the name of the guy who had this quote, but I want to give him credit. The spirit of rebellion has its roots in pride, not principle. And you can put this into your own words, okay? What it's saying is, when someone has a spirit of rebellion and they want to rebel against authority, it's not because they think they have better beliefs or stronger principles or something like that. It's because of pride, that they want to be the one on top. And we see that so much with the things that Korah and Dathan and Abiram, what they're all saying. We see that for them, it's really a pride thing. They're twisting the facts. They're lying to make Moses look bad. And it's all about their pride. It's not about principle. They just want to be the guys on top. And so you can go ahead and make a note of that and put it whatever words you want to, as long as you get the idea down. So it says, then Moses was very angry and said to the Lord, do not respect their offering. I have not taken one donkey from them, nor have I hurt one of them. And Moses said to Korah, tomorrow you and all your company will be present before the Lord, you and they, as well as Aaron. So Moses does two things when they bring these accusations to Moses. He says, well, first of all, he says it's not even true. I haven't done what they said that they did, what they said I did. And two, he just leaves it in God's hands. I mean, he tells God, do what you want. He's going to let God take care of it. Moses isn't even going to stand up against him. So he tells them, all you 250 people, let's meet up tomorrow morning, and we'll let God figure out who's right and who's wrong, who should be leader and who shouldn't. And that's what they're going to do. So, I bet they were up all night and they were just wondering, what's God going to do? How's he going to pick who's going to be the next leader? They're probably excited, or they're probably nervous, or they're probably up all night just thinking, what's going to happen. Moses didn't even know what was going to happen. Look down at verse 19. And Korah gathered all the congregation against them at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. Then the glory of the Lord appeared to all the congregation. And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, separate yourselves from among this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment. So God is telling them, he says, Moses and Aaron, whenever I make my decision about who should be the next leader, you don't want to be standing where all those guys are standing. That's what he's telling them. Spooky stuff. Skip down to verse 25, and we'll read what happened. Then Moses rose and went to Dathan and Abiram, and the elders of Israel followed him. And he spoke to the congregation, saying, depart now from the tents of these wicked men. Touch nothing of theirs, lest you be consumed in all their sins. So he's telling the whole congregation, step away from where those guys are standing. Verse 27, so they got away from around the tents of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. And Dathan and Abiram came and stood at the door of their tents with their wives, their sons, and their little children. And I'm kind of glad, these people, when Moses said, hey, God's about to make his decision and you don't want to be standing with them, it's a little bit inspiring that they actually did listen to Moses and they stepped away from that area. So the only people standing in that spot, it was Korah and those 250 men who were following him. Those are the only ones that are standing there. So they listened. Verse 31. Now it came to pass as he finished speaking all these words that the ground split apart under them, And the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up with their households, and all the men with Korah with all their goods. So they closed and went down with them alive into the pit. The earth closed over them, and they perished from among the assembly. So, like an earthquake, very dramatic, supernatural, obviously. Ground opened up and swallowed them, and it said they went down to, what did it say they went down to? The pit. And if you're wondering, well, what is the pit? Well, I looked up that word because I'm like, what does the pit mean? Okay, this is like the only place in the Bible where it's translated the pit. Most of the time, this word is translated hell. So it says they went down alive into hell. For some reason right here, they call it the pit, but it means hell. So make a note that all these things mean the same thing. When the Bible says the pit, it also means Sheol, and that is like the Hebrew word for hell, which I'll explain in a minute. The place of the undead is Sheol. It also means hell. That can also be what it means. And the word also means the place of no return. So it's a very terrible place to go, because the place of no return. Sometimes we will say things like, well, so-and-so is going to die and go to hell, or so-and-so will be in hell forever. And you might say, well, what's the difference in those? Like, you guys know in Revelation, do you remember a line where it says, death and hell were thrown into the lake of fire? Do you guys remember anything like that? Okay. In the Bible, it says when people die, they go to hell, but then someday they're going to be in hell forever. And it's like, well, okay, if they're in hell now and then they're going to be in hell forever, like, what's going on? When the Bible talks about Sheol, that means current hell. It's like where people die and they go to hell right now. That's called Sheol. Now, then later on, there's another place where they stay forever called the lake of fire, which is pretty much, I think it's pretty similar to the same thing. So when you hear lake of fire, that is something in the future. It's not right now, but that's where people would be forever. If they died right now, they would go to Sheol. But they both mean hell, so it's the same thing. And I know hell's a disturbing topic, and I'm not trying to get into it right now. But that is the difference in the two things. Sheol is where people are, if they died and went to hell right now, and the lake of fire, that is in the future. That is the forever thing. Did you guys see the movie Jurassic World last year? Did anyone see that? What was definitely by far the most brutal death out of all those people who got eaten by dinosaurs in that movie? There was one death in there that I thought was so over the top, crazy brutal. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? It was that assistant who was watching the boys, and she gets picked up by one of those pterodactyl things, and they fly up high in the air, and then they drop her, and she falls in the water, and then you're like, oh, well, she's safe in the water. Well, then they dive into the water and pick her up again, and she's just getting tossed around in the air, and then she falls in the water again, and you're like, oh, well, she's going to be okay. Now it's all over. And then, the hugest dinosaur, in the whole movie, comes up underneath her and just swallows her. And goes back, swallows her whole. Okay, when I watched that, for 10 minutes in the movie after that, I'm just like, she's still alive. She's just inside the dinosaur's stomach. She's just in its stomach. It was the most disturbing death in the whole movie, because she didn't just die right then. I mean, she was swallowed alive, right? Do you guys remember that? Okay. It was disturbing because for 10 minutes, I'm just thinking, she's in a stomach acid or something right now. I just kept thinking about that girl, that nanny girl. She didn't deserve that.
I just kept thinking,
Oh, the red-haired one?
That's what I was thinking. Why do you have heels?
I know. I was like, why didn't she take her shoes off when the T-Rex was chasing her? Yeah. Okay, so she just got swallowed whole. She went down alive. Think about, that was terrifying in the movie. All these people, the ground swallowed them up alive. The Bible was very clear when Korah and these other dudes died, they all went down into the pit alive. It's just a very disturbing thought. They went straight into hell alive. And people in hell, they are, in one sense, they are alive in a way, because they're aware of where they are. They're in torment, so they're conscious of it. But it's also a place of death. And so Korah and these rebels went down to hell alive. That's basically the end of the Korah story. I want you guys to make a note of a couple things about apostasy real quick. Contrast, or the three people that we've been talking about the last 3 weeks: Cain, Balaam, and Korah. I gave you a handout with their jobs on them, so you don't have to write down all their jobs again if you just study the handout. But this note here, I want you guys to make a note of this. It doesn't matter what level you're at or what status you have. Anybody can be an apostate. You got Cain, and he was a farmer. You got Balaam, and he was a prophet. You got Korah, and he was a prince. Anybody can be an apostate. It doesn't mean you just have to be like a pastor or some religious leader like Balaam was. It doesn't just mean you're in some politician or in charge of a bunch of people like Korah. You can be a farmer. And I don't mean that farmers are like just really low on the totem pole or something, but it's just like a normal everyday job. It's not something in front of a bunch of people. It's not something with like responsible for a bunch of people's lives. I mean, unless you're feeding them, but it's not like being a prophet or a prince. It's just a regular job. But anybody can be an apostate. We see people at different levels here. And this verse is telling us about all three of these guys and using them as examples of apostates. So we see it can be anybody. But let's look at the order that the people were in also. First was Cain, and then it was Balaam, then it was Korah. There's something also significant about the order. This order was not chronological. Cain came first, and then it was Korah's story later in the Bible, and then Balaam's story came after. But that's not the order it put them in the verse. The verse is actually showing us something by the order also. It's the sequence of apostasy. Cain was about the beginning of apostasy. If you remember Cain's story, Cain was changing the gospel. Cain was adding works in. Cain was not trusting in the blood of the Lamb. And so Cain, it starts off when someone gets the gospel wrong. That's the beginning of apostasy. Then you've got Balaam. Balaam is the activity of apostasy. It's using religion for just selfish desires. Balaam was, he was using religion to get rich because he was so greedy. When you see people and they're using religion for power or money, status, that kind of thing, that's what apostates do. They're using religion to get what they want. And so that's what Balaam was showing us. And then we come to Korah. And Korah shows us the end of apostasy, or what I'd call the fate of apostates. It's destruction. I mean, he goes straight into hell alive. And that is what apostasy leads to. It leads to destruction every time. And so please, if you make note of one thing from this slide, the end of apostasy is destruction. But that's the sequence of apostasy right there. I want to read Jude 11 again. He said, "Woe to them, they've taken the way of Cain. They have rushed for profit into Balaam's error. They've been destroyed in Korah's rebellion." There seems to just be no hope. When someone is an apostate, the Bible doesn't really give any hope for them. If you look at those three words that it used to describe apostates, listen to these three verbs or words. They were taken. They rushed. They have been destroyed. All three of those are in past tense. They're written as if it's already happened. Taken, rushed, have been destroyed. Okay? And that's what it's telling us about apostates. Now, apostates are alive today. But the way Jude talks about them, it's as if they've already been destroyed. Why is it in past tense if it hasn't happened yet? There's apostates alive today. They haven't been destroyed yet. But that's the way Jude's talking about them. Well, when the Bible uses past tense to talk about something that's going to happen in the future, that's the Bible's way of saying it's a done deal. Nothing's going to change it. It's going to happen no matter what. So when it says they've been destroyed and they haven't been destroyed yet, that's the Bible's way of saying they are going to be destroyed and nothing's going to change it. It switches right to past tense. It reminds me of a part in Romans chapter 8, and it says some very good things about whenever you're a Christian. I mean, look at this. It says in Romans 8, "Whom he predestined, these he also called." It's talking about Christians. "Whom he called, these he also justified. Whom he justified, he also glorified." Okay, so we read those and we're like, hey, we're Christians. Yeah, we're called by God. We're justified. That means he made our sins white. He made us white as snow, just as if I'd never sinned. We read those things and we're like, well, those are great. Well, you get to this last one. Does he justified? He also glorified. Well, we might stop there. You know what glorified means? Glorified means, you're living in heaven and you're perfect and sinless now. That's what it means to be glorified. So we read that and What's weird about that? We're not in heaven, are we? Last I checked, I wasn't glorified. Only glorified person in here is maybe Damon, I don't know. But no. Jonathan, if he was here, I would have to say, yeah, I usually pick Jonathan for the glorified person, no offense. But because, isn't it obvious he's Jonathan? I mean, glorified, that hasn't happened yet. That's the Bible's way of saying, hey, your glorification is a done deal. You're going to be glorified. You're going to be in heaven and be made perfect. And you won't have to deal with the flesh anymore and all that stuff. And he says it past tense, even though it hasn't happened yet, because it's going to happen no matter what. So that's why the Bible will jump to past tense sometimes for things that have not yet occurred. Okay, to finish up today, I wanted to tell you a story of a cult in modern times that really followed this destructive path that was like Korah. Have you guys ever heard of a guy named David Koresh?
Yeah.
Do you have? It's not your mom, you know. Okay.
What?
Oh, David and Korah. Your dad's name is David and your mom's name is Korah. I got it now. Okay. No, this guy here. David Koresh was an apostate, very successful cult leader. He died in the early 90s. Let me tell you his story really quick. And I picked him because his last name is Koresh, and it sounds like Korah, who was the story that we talked about today. So, he was born Vernon Wayne Howe. He was born to a 15-year-old single mother in 1959. He never knew his father. He was dyslexic. He had a lot of musical talent. He dropped out of high school. He joined the Seventh-day Adventist Church at age 20. And that's a denomination. I don't like that denomination very much. They're Christians, but they get into weird beliefs very easily. My grandma was one of them, but they believe you go to church on Saturday. That's really their main thing. Nothing wrong with that, but they get into some weird beliefs sometimes. So he joined the Seventh-day Adventist Church. He got kicked out for being a bad influence. They just ran him off. They thought he was bad news. So he went to Hollywood, tried to be a rock star. It never took off. Eventually, he moved to Waco, Texas, and he joined a cult in 1981. While he was there, this cult had already been going. They were led by this woman. I didn't put her name down. I forgot to. But she was a prophetess of this cult. She said she was a prophet, and she was in her 60s, and he had an affair with her that carried on for a while. When she died, he took over the cult. The cult was called the Branch Davidians. The Branch Davidians. And so they had this building in Waco, Texas. It was called Mount Carmel. And like with what happens with cults a lot, a lot of weird stuff went on over there. So he married a bunch of teenage girls. Apparently he fathered 24 children. And that was his goal. He wanted to have 24 children. So he married all these teenage girls to make that happen. And they actually could not stop him for that because his marriages were not legal. And in Texas, you can get married when you're 14 if you have parents' permission. So they couldn't prosecute him for it because their parents were staying at the complex, at the building that they called Mount Carmel. And they gave their daughters permission to marry him, I guess. And so he was marrying all these teenage girls and getting them pregnant. It's a terrible thing, but they could not prosecute him because of the age of consent. He also killed a lot of people, and they couldn't prove that until later. They tried to arrest him for it, but they didn't have proof. He killed people who tried to take over the cult away from him. He hit one guy in the head with an axe. He shot people. He was a very bad dude. They had a meth lab in this complex. He changed his name. Like I said, his name was Vernon Wayne Howe. He changed his name to David Koresh because the cult was called the Branch Davidians. Okay, finally, in 1993, the government was finally able to catch him doing something wrong. They found proof that he had a bunch of illegal weapons at his complex. And I'll throw up a picture of it here, okay? That's the Mount Carmel complex right there.
Looks great.
Yeah, that's where they were all holed up. Okay, so there's like 100 people in the building. Hey, today's February 28th, isn't it? In 1993, on February 28th, they showed up and they tried to arrest him because they had proof that there were these illegal weapons there, or they had a search warrant to go in. Well, he wouldn't let them in, so they had a big shootout, and 6 of the Branch Davidian cult people died. 4 government agents died. Then there was just like a hostage situation, standoff, that lasted 51 days. Okay, so from February 28th until April 19th of that year, basically the government was just surrounded this place and was waiting for him to come out. And he was holed up inside, and he was furiously writing like his last...
Goodbye.
Well, like the last, he thought he was just going to get captured and go to prison or die. So he was writing out everything he wanted his followers to keep. Probably like a Bible or something like that he wrote himself. I don't know. The government didn't just want to run in guns a-blazing and just, take the place over. Because a lot of the people in the cult, they were just like civilians. They weren't armed. And there were a lot of children there. And so they were just afraid, if we walk in guns a-blazing, innocent people are going to get killed. Well, finally, on the last day, the Attorney General, they told the FBI, they said, okay, you guys can go ahead and go in and raid the place, because I guess it's come to that. It's been 51 days. So they finally went in and did that. As soon as the FBI entered the building, they had some kind of booby trap, and it made the building like burst into flames. There were like 3 places in the building, and I don't know, they aren't sure how they started the fire. They activated a fire somehow and set the place ablaze. And so the FBI could not get in there and do anything. They evacuated. But 9 people made it out. 80 people burned to death in the fire. They just burned it to the ground around them. That's what happened to these people. And they were not forced to be there. They voluntarily came. They wanted to be there with David Koresh. But they kept their kids there. There were like 22 children who died in this thing, and pregnant women. So terrible thing that happened. I was 3 when this was going on, but I remember my parents talking about it in the 90s, so I guess it must have been a few years after they were talking about it. I remember hearing about this, but not like as it was going on, because I was 3. Okay. And I said 9 people made it out before it burned to the ground around them. Out of those 9 people, 8 of them went to prison because they were colluding with a criminal. Some of them are still there in prison. So anyway, it's not always going to be something dramatic like a building burning down or the earth swallowing someone up underneath their feet. But apostasy, it always ends in destruction. It always leads to Sheol or hell. That is what apostasy always does. Even when it's not dramatic like this, that's where it always leads for people. And so that is the ultimate fate of apostasy. Just to close up, Korah, this guy Korah, did you know that, if you haven't heard of Korah, I guess you want to know this. His sons actually split off and did not follow their dad. He had some sons that and all of his sons and his grandchildren and all of his descendants, they stayed very true to the Lord. So when their dad started trying to turn this rebellion and turn away from Moses, his sons said, no, we're going to stay true to Moses, and they stood on Moses' side. So they didn't get swallowed up in the ground. And whenever you read in the Psalms, there are 25 Psalms that were written by the sons of Korah, because they aren't all his literal sons. Some of them are like his grandchildren or his descendants. They're called the sons of Korah, and they were some good people in the Bible. If you ever hear about the sons of Korah, they were not like their great-great-grandfather who got swallowed into hell alive. They were some good people. Samuel, if you ever like 1st and 2nd Samuel, you hear about that book in the Bible. Samuel was one of the sons of Korah. He was a priest. So they were good people. Like the children of Israel, we always have a choice whether we're going to stand with a rebel. So guys, when you look at who to follow, when you look at leaders or pastors or even jobs, look for someone who has substance to them. Don't look for someone who has just a great personality, but look for someone that you can trust to be a good leader. Someone who says like the truth. See, Korah was telling all these lies. Korah was just making all this stuff up. Whenever you look for a leader, check out what they say and make sure that it's honest and truthful. Don't just go for someone who promises change. Several years back, there was a presidential candidate and his whole motto was change. And he never said what he wanted to change. He just said, yeah, we're just going to have change. Change is a very exciting word, right? Oh, we're going to have change. You don't stop and think a lot of times, well, do we really need change, or were we okay before? But people say change and people get excited about that. Listen, guys, don't follow after personality or just someone who promises change like Korah was just going to bring them. Hey, we're going to give you change. We're going to give you a new leader. Well, he was a terrible dude. So always ask yourself, which leaders would bring you to God and have principles that are biblical? Let's pray before we go. Lord Jesus, thanks for this lesson, the stuff that you can teach us about Korah and about his rebellion, and the principles we can take from Jude verse 11. So many great things we learn from that verse, and we can apply all those to our lives. So we appreciate you, Lord. We appreciate you, what you taught in this chapter. Help it to sink into our souls and that we don't just forget it really quick, but that it sinks in and we remember it. And Lord, thanks for bringing us here safely. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.